Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for a special panel to celebrate National Hispanic Heritage Month and the Latinx community. Woven into life in our city, in our state, and really in our entire country is the incredible influence of the Latinx community. We feel it through our cities, our neighborhoods, in our culture, our education, our economy, our labor movement, our laws, and leadership. Our city is proudly the birthplace of many giants from the Latinx community, and I could spend a whole hour name checking some of the greatest New Yorkers, but suffice it to say, their contributions have propelled us forward in almost every aspect of our lives, from politics to social justice, to business, to arts, entertainment, higher education, sports, and really so much more. Today, we're honored to be joined by a panel of Latinx New Yorkers who work tirelessly to make our city a better place to live, work, and visit. I should say, I know people are not exactly visiting New York right now, but that will change. People miss us and we'll be back, I believe, more than ever once they can do so safely. And a big part of what makes our city so special, a place people want to be and want to visit, is the diversity of our communities and their impact on New York. Today, we'll first hear from Tonio Burgos, an ABNY Foundation board member and the CEO of Tonio Burgos Associates, who is one of the most influential people in our city, in our state, and in our nation. He spent 2 decades in public service, including as a top aide to the late Governor Mario Cuomo for 15 years, dating back to Mario's time as Secretary of State and in the cabinet of Hugh Carey. To many of us, Tonio is who we turn to for wisdom and guidance on complicated issues of public policy and politics. We always leave the wiser thanks to his insight and counsel, and we're looking forward to hearing more from him today. We also have an exceptional panel and moderator joining us, truly trailblazers in their respective industries. They are all passionate advocates for New York and New Yorkers. And while Tonio will introduce each of them individually, I just want to thank them all, both for what they're both participating today and for all they do to make a better New York. Part of this effort to ensure an equitable New York includes exercising our constitutional right to vote. This year, registered voters in New York State can vote in 3 ways: by absentee ballot, in-person early voting, or in-person voting on election day, November 3rd. October 27th is the last day to request an absentee ballot. We'll share a link in the chat for you to learn more about how to request an absentee ballot and how to vote early. So please, if you haven't already, please consider how to vote at this point in time. I know everybody's life is complicated right now, more than we had ever imagined or expected, but please vote. Our city and state, who we are as New Yorkers, what we stand for together, deserves to be fully heard and really counted in our election process. I just want to say one last thing. We were excited to really hear from this panel. I think they have all had a big impact on our city to make our city a more fair and equitable city. They've all been leaders in the Latinx community. I'm really so grateful. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Tonio Burgos. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for showing the great vision and leadership, not only to work with the Latinx community, but the African-American community. The work you and Melva and Laura have done, along with our board, has been extraordinary. But it's not unexpected or a surprise, because I've known what ABNY can do from the very, very beginning. I was there in 1975 when ABNY was formed by Bob Tisch, Lou Rudin, David Rockefeller, and your father, who was the voice of all of us in that period of difficulty when the city and state were near bankruptcy and we had a federal government that said drop dead to New York. However, we have a great future ahead of us, and you'll see from this panel how terrific this future is going to be. But I must say that one of the things that ABNY's been doing most recently, and we had sad news yesterday by the Supreme Court's actions, is the ability for the census to continue in New York. We have seen in this pandemic what a healthcare disparity problem we have in this state and city and across the nation. And if we have a census count that is underrepresented, we will have not enough representation in Washington and not enough federal funding. So ABNY, continue to do this work. We as a board member support everything you do on this. Despite what the Supreme Court says, we'll find a way to continue to move forward on that issue. Now to our panel, you know, it is extraordinary that we've been able to assemble such a great panel. Let me start with my dear friend for many, many years, Vincent Alvarez. I met Vincent when he was a young and up-and-coming leader in the IBW. He's become the first Latino president of a major labor organization like the Central Labor Council, which is made up of public employee unions and private unions, the building trades, et cetera. And he represents in the voice of labor and people who work in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Our distinguished member of the New York State Assembly, Carmen de la Rosa, you are an incredible leader. Let's just start with the premise that you are the author of the DREAM Act, which is so necessary to continue to build the fabric, not only of the Latinx community in New York, which is 29% of the population. Of 8 million people, we're 29%, but to give them dignity and to give them the ability to be full participating Americans. Your work has been extraordinary. But you've also led on a critical issue, and that's mental health. Mental health in this pandemic, we've seen how important it is to have the appropriate kind of leadership on that. So Carmen de la Rosa, thank you for serving on this panel. Felix Matos, I've known Felo, I don't want to say how long because it's been a long, long time, but I met Felo when he was the director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College, a very important organization. It really keeps the records and the archives and the history of Puerto Rican leadership that started coming here in the late 20s through the time of the late great migrations of the 40s. And Felo went on to serve in the cabinet of a governor of Puerto Rico and come back still in one piece to be the president of Ostos College, the president of Queens College, and now he is the leader of the entire CUNY system, which is the most important educational vehicle for people of color in this city. And Marlene Cintron. Marlene, I'm not gonna say how long I know you, Marlene. All I'll say is that when Jimmy Carter came to Charlotte Street to rebuild the Bronx, Marlene was standing there with Congressman Robert Garcia to ensure that that happened. And Marlene with Congressman Garcia was the architect of what we used to call then enterprise zones. Now they call them empowerment zones. And she led in that effort. She also served in the cabinet of one of the governors of Puerto Rico, as well as now running the Bronx overall economic development. No one knows better about our economy than Marlene Cintron. And to round out our panel, Richie Torres. What a great story. First of all, think about what he's done in the council, single-handedly leading the effort to save the public housing in this city. The public housing, so instrumental to so many of us. I remember as a youngster working for Congressman and Borough President Herman Badillo, how we fought to build some of that public housing, but Ritchie has taken it a step further and has led. And hopefully on November 3rd, we will call him Congressman Richie Torres. So this panel, I think you will enjoy. Now the moderator, that's another story. The moderator is one of those great, great stories of New York. Her and her mother, great leaders, civic leaders in the county of Rockland. She then moves on to be a great leader in the Andrew Cuomo administration. You see, I was part of the 52 Cuomo administration, 52nd governor. She was part of the 56 crowd, you know, a little younger. So she did a lot of work in the community. And this administration representing people of color is partly a victory of the things that Aimee did to ensure that that happens. And now she's in the private sector. We welcome her. She's going to hopefully bring to New York a great, great gaming company, the Sands Company of Las Vegas. And that's our moderator, who is as tough as nails. So panelists, don't screw up. She knows how to crack the whip. So thank you everyone for joining us. I thank all of you, but more importantly, Stephen, to you and your family and everything you've done for the city and your leadership stepping up. I really, really appreciate it as a New Yorker. And I think everyone understands how important this organization is. So thank you, Stephen.
Tonio, I will take it from here and say good afternoon, everyone. Even though I currently live in Rockland County, I am a Queens girl through and through, born and raised. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel. First, I want to thank my dear friend Tonio. You know, oftentimes in speeches, we talk about the shoulders of giants upon who we stand. And Tonio certainly is one of those individuals, whether it was in government or politics, in serving the Latino community. He is one of the giants that we certainly should be celebrating during this Hispanic-Latinx Heritage Month. And I am extremely proud to call Tonio my friend and my mentor. So thank you, Tonio, for being here with us, and thank you for the kind words in your introduction. Stephen, Melvina, Laura, and all of you at ABNY, the ABNY team, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this incredibly important discussion this afternoon, and for having the foresight to understand that without the Latino community and without our Latino leaders, we cannot move this city and state forward. And so we're all dedicated here, reinforcing our commitment to ensuring the success of our city and our state as we move out of this pandemic. With that, let us move on to the discussion. Luckily, I'm not going to be in the position of our colleague over at Fox News, Chris Wallace, this afternoon. And we are going to have a very wonderful discussion amongst wonderful panelists. I want to thank all of you for participating this afternoon. And I commend you all for the respect that you have for one another, and for the audience that is so eagerly waiting to hear your opinions on the important topics that we will be discussing this afternoon. With that, let us start with the first question, which will go to Chancellor Matos Rodriguez. What do we as New Yorkers who are in a position to effectuate change, that is all of us as business leaders, civic leaders, policymakers, trusted community figures, and academics, what do we need to do to help our city recover from the COVID-19 pandemic? Chancellor?
Well, thank you, Aimee, for your role, and to Tonio, my brother, and to the ABNY family, Melville, Stephen, thank you for the invite, the fellow panelists who are also part of my extended work family. It's great to be here. The City University of New York is the educational engine of our city. So our commitment as we try to rebuild the city in an equitable way to recover from the effects of the pandemic is to be the partner to the business community, to listen to what the business community needs in terms of the immediate and the longer term skills and soft and hard that they might need for their companies, and what they need to translate into programs in our campuses, so we can create that pipeline to create more partnerships and internships and opportunities, so that linkage is more complete, to work with our elected officials in designing workforce development programs and other programs that feed New Yorkers to those positions. So that is, we've been working on that before, but really intentionally as a result of the crisis. It is our highest priority to do it for the city, for the students that we serve who are in the pipeline, and to serve all those opportunities and have all the talent in the world. So this is a key moment for New York, and this is why the City University of New York was created, to be able to be that key indispensable educational partner as we move forward. And we also will continue to take care of the communities where our campus are, to be an anchor there, to be supportive in social needs that they might have. But again, that is our priority moving forward. And how do we talk more concretely about some of those things as the panel progresses? Just to let to know people that the one good thing about the virtual world is that I have to jump and go to Ostos Community College to give an award to some students, but I'll be back in the panel in a little bit. So if you don't see me, I'm coming back.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. If we can move on to Councilman Torres with the same question, what do you think that we as Latinos who are in position of change need to do to help our city move forward?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. State the obvious, we have to vote because, the lesson learned from 2016 is a few votes at the margins can have profound consequences for the future of our country. And for the first time in recent history, we cannot take for granted the peaceful transfer of power. And so it's important the right candidate wins both the popular vote and the electoral college so decisively that there's no confusion about the outcome of the election. So it's important to vote. It's important to complete the census, even though the Supreme Court has short-circuited the process. The failure of one New Yorker to participate in the census means the loss of $3,700 every year, which over the course of 10 years is $37,000. So if 100,000 New Yorkers are deprived of the opportunity to fill out the census, that's $370 million a year. That's $3.7 billion over a 10-year period. That's real money. That's fewer resources for our public hospitals and our public schools, for our public transit and our public housing, for our parks and our libraries. That means less representation in the Electoral College and the House of Representatives for 10 years. So it is, apart from the United States Constitution, the census is the single most important document in American democracy. And I think it matters who's the next president of the United States. Being here in ABNY, and your question reminds me that 45 years ago, in October of 1975, President Gerald Ford famously delivered his statement before the National Press Club that he would veto any federal bailout of New York City. And that led to the infamous headline, "Ford to City, drop dead." And there's a sense in which we're living through a repeat of history, right? Trump to New York City, drop dead. And not only is he neglecting the city, but the president has designated New York City as an anarchist jurisdiction. So I would argue that the future of New York City depends on who's in the federal government. And I'm going to be partisan for a moment. If Joe Biden wins the presidency and the Democratic Party wins the Senate and retains the House, we could have the makings of an FDR moment. We could see a multi-trillion-dollar investment in the infrastructure of our country, which would have profound benefits for New York City. So I think we all have a vested interest in creating an FDR moment that benefits New York City. But the federal government is a necessary but insufficient condition for saving our city. We need to improve the quality of government here in New York City. Right? We need a mayor and a city council that has a working relationship with the governor and the state legislature, with the business community, with labor. New York City emerged from the financial crisis in the 1970s on the strength of partnership. We have a wealth of talent in our city, but I often feel the whole is less than the sum of the parts because of the leadership crisis in New York City. So we need to improve the quality of the leadership that we have locally. And just very quickly, I think we need to rethink our approach to growth. We need, for me, the question is not whether we should grow as a city, but how we should grow. We should grow equitably and sustainably. And I do feel the decision, to sabotage Amazon and now sabotage Industry City, those were tragically lost opportunities for the city. I don't think it's wise for us to take a reactionary, rejectionist approach to the city. Industry City, if it had gone forward, would have created 20,000 jobs. In the notion of killing 20,000 jobs in the midst of depression level unemployment, strikes me as irresponsible, and we need pragmatic leaders who are going to carve a more responsible way forward for the city.
Thank you, Councilman. Moving on to our Assemblywoman. Same question.
Thank you for the opportunity to join. I want to echo some of the same remarks of my colleagues. We have to engage. We have to force our communities to pay attention. But I also want to say something on a little bit of a positive note. Our city and our communities are resilient. We have overcome in the past, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the Great Depression, whether it's the recession, our city has overcome in the past. And I think that one of the messages that I often speak when I visit small businesses in our communities who have the fear of shuttering their doors forever is that we have to understand the history of the Latino community, the history of a community that has come together in the midst of crisis in the past in order to lead. I think our city has the ability, and the residents of our city, led by Latino leaders, has the resiliency in order to continue to rebuild. But I also agree with Councilman Torres on the fact that we have to prioritize the revitalization of our communities. As we look at what's happening to small businesses on the ground, we have to ensure that they have the support systems that they need in order to qualify for loans, in order to qualify for grants, in order to get the financial assistance that they need. As we look at the revitalization of our communities, workers should be at the forefront of our minds. What can we do to improve the quality of life of the workers who move our local economies? So these are all areas that we are looking at a daily basis. I think that when we look at the issue of food insecurity, the Latino community has been deeply impacted by the inability to give access to food right now to the most vulnerable across our city. I think we need to be creative on the ways that we create partnerships, not only with farmers upstate, but with institutions that are working and living in our city to ensure that no New Yorker goes hungry, especially not New Yorkers in our communities that already have been disadvantaged by the historical underfunding. I think that this is an opportunity for us to reimagine budgeting through a lens of equity, and for us to ensure that the strongest members of our communities their voices matter just as much as the members of our communities that are not often at the decision-making table. And that should be the lens through which we look at legislating on a state level, on a city level, as we look towards 2021 and we get ready to have a brand new city council, a brand new mayor, a brand new comptroller. How are our communities empowered to be at the decision-making table? And those are all issues that I think our community has a lot of ideas around. Like I've said, resiliency is built into our bloodlines. And so I know that working together, we're gonna be able to reimagine the future of our city stronger than it was before.
Thank you for that, Assemblywoman. To your point about workers, Vinny, how does labor fit into this paradigm?
Well, Aimee, let me just thank, of course, Abdi and everybody for participating in this today. I step back for a moment. I think moments like this, when we're dealing with the economic crisis and we're dealing with the pandemic, were made for groups like Abdi and bringing all of us together to address some of these really important issues that are impacting our communities, but particularly to the Latino community. And we see the unemployment the unemployment rates for the Latino community, about 18% in this country over just the past couple of weeks in New York State. Just as some baseline statistics, you see no group has been more impacted over the past 12 weeks than Latinos here in New York. And to go along with that, the group that has the highest percentage of people who've lost income as well in New York State have been Latinos. So we see that they're very, very much impacted. So as an umbrella organization that represents working people throughout the city, you say, well, what can we do? How do we both deal with the situation impacting workers, but also create an economy with broad-based prosperity that's going to reach communities, underserved communities, and communities that have been hard hit recently? And I think New York City is unique unlike a lot of cities throughout the country, where business groups, labor, government, academia, philanthropy, all of us kind of coming together and working together to create this dynamic, which leads to broad-based economic growth and hopefully reaches all the communities that we mentioned. So what can we do? I think that more than anything else, there's three broad things that we have to do. The time for transformative leadership could not be more critical in this city than it is needed now. This city's economy certainly is fragile. The consequences of the pandemic, and we're still going through it, of course, cannot be overstated. So I think that that's very important. We look at what happened recently with the census. That is very important because we're going to all need to make sure that we get the assistance that's needed from Washington. The consequences of falling short with the census and not getting the relief that we're needed right now from Washington are really impacting some of the most marginalized communities throughout the city. So we got to get that right as well. And the last thing is, as we see the landscape of work kind of change because of the pandemic, remote work, the things that we're doing now, we do have to make sure that, and we in the labor movement are going to do our part to see to it that workers have a voice at work, that they have the power to participate in some of these decisions which take place at work so they can achieve the wages and the benefits and the economic security that they for far too long, I would say that they haven't had here in the city and across the country.
Great, thank you, Vinny. Councilman, I'd like to come back to you if I could. You recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about racial identity, which I thought was really important for, quite frankly, for all of us to read and understand the meaning of it. But what does it mean to you to be an Afro-Latino New Yorker? And as you seek higher office, how has the fact that society often separates these two racial identities affected you personally?
Yes, so I wrote the op-ed in the context of caucus politics in Congress. In the United States Congress, there is an unwritten rule that prohibits dual membership in both the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus. So under the caucus politics of Congress, you can either be Black or Latinx, but you can never be both. But in the real world, you can be both. Afro-Latinos like myself do exist. And I resent the notion of choosing between two identities that are equally important to me. And so I wrote an op-ed that respectfully called upon the caucuses to update their norms to reflect the reality of how people experience identity. Identity is intersectional rather than binary. There need not be a strict separation between Latino and Black identity. You can certainly be both. I am both. And, it matters not only in terms of identity, it matters in public policy. When the world sees me, it sees a Black man. And I was among the Black and brown men who were, humiliated at the hands of police during the height of stop and frisk policing. And if the Congressional Black Caucus is debating criminal justice reform that has a particular impact on Black and brown men, as an Afro-Latino, as a Black man, I have a right to have a seat at that table. I have a right to have a voice in that conversation. Our views as policymakers are often a product of our lived experiences, and the lived experience of an Afro-Latino is going to be different than someone who's simply Latino or simply Black. When I entered the city council back in 2013, I might have been the only elected official, one of the few who identified as Afro-Latino. I have come to discover that more and more people are embracing Afro-Latino identity. I think city and state does these power lists, the most powerful Latinos, the most powerful African Americans, and I've appeared on both, which is a recognition that members of the media are finally recognizing that Afro-Latino identity is real and that it should be recognized and celebrated. There is a generational and geographic difference. I find that the new guard, millennials, members of Generation Z, are much more receptive to an intersectional view of identity. And I find that New York City is much more receptive to an intersectional view of identity than the rest of the country. Here in New York City, in the state legislature and in the city council, there's a single caucus that integrates all people of color, Black, Latinos, and Asians. Whereas in the West Coast or in the South or in the United States Congress, there are distinct caucuses that segregate Latinos, African Americans. So I actually think New York City is ahead of the curve. And I think we're going to move, not overnight, but I think we're eventually going to move in a direction in which people of color are part of a single caucus. At least that's my hope.
Thank you for that. I think the history of that was that there were different movements, right? I think you touched upon that in your op-ed. Do you want to touch upon that just quickly now? Yeah,
look, I think each of those caucuses arose from a historical moment, particularly in the 70s, when it was felt that Latinos and Blacks were underrepresented, particularly in the executive branch. So I respect the history of both of those institutions. But I think it's possible to pay respect to the history and the traditions of those institutions while recognizing that we have to adapt, because we're living in a moment of racial enlightenment. We're living in a moment when Black Lives Matter has become the rallying cry of our nation, and there has to be respect for Afro-Latinx identity.
Thank you, Councilman. To the councilman's note, Assemblywoman, of his own experiences with stop and frisk, you have been a very vocal supporter of criminal justice reform. How has your experience representing and also living in Northern Manhattan informed your positions on that particular issue? And how does the package of reform that the state legislature passed earlier this year in Albany impacted your constituents?
Well, thank you for the question. And I also want to thank the councilman for his eloquent explanation of the duality in our identity. My lens around criminal justice is shaped by being a young woman growing up in Washington Heights in the 90s. At the height of what we saw were the symptoms of the Rockefeller drug laws and the war on drugs, where Dominicans were picked up throughout my community. They were stopped, they were frisked, they were picked up. Riots ensued based upon the killing of a young Dominican on 181st Street in St. Nicholas. And so my upbringing was shaped through that lens of being a young woman growing up in a community where my mom would say, you want to go outside, look out the window because it's not safe for you to go outside. And instead of feeling the ability to feel safe in my community, I felt fear for the unknown of what was going on outside my window, but also fear for not knowing who was there to protect me. I was summoned in front of my building for simply standing there by an NYPD officer. My brother was stopped and frisked. A whole generation of my peers, Black and brown men, were sentenced to long prison sentences during that time. And that is the lens through which I view criminal justice reform. Last year, we had the opportunity as a legislature to revisit some of the arcane laws that existed on the books. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is that we looked at cash bail and we looked at the inequity, both racial inequity and economic inequities that existed in that system, where wealth was the determining factor between freedom and incarceration. For me, it was an undoing of an evil that wreaked havoc on generation of fathers, mothers, children who were separated from their fathers during that time of me growing up in the 90s in New York City. We looked to bring justice into the equation by reforming discovery laws so that people wouldn't be sentenced without having a full view of the evidence before them. Speedy trials. There's a constitution in New York State and in New York City that says that people have a right, a guaranteed right to trial and in order to prove their innocence before they are detained. That wasn't happening in our city, in a city that believes in fairness. And so we revisited this legislation and we made changes that I think will bring a sense of justice to the men and women from my communities and from communities across our cities that have been incarcerated. Last year, as a member of the Corrections Committee, I had the honor of visiting Greenhaven Correctional Facility in New York State. And when you walk in, you see the faces of Black and brown men who have been targeted and picked up from our communities without a sense of how we are going to ensure that that mill of incarceration doesn't continue to take away from our community the people who live there, the sons and daughters of the people that have built this city. And when you look at the faces and you hear the stories of these men, there are men with family members who came, many of them immigrants who came to this country looking for opportunity, who were caught up in a system that targeted our communities. And so when I walk down the street and I talk to my constituents, I have to admit that this is one of the most controversial topics because people feel strongly about the need to have a safe community. But a safe community does not come in exchange for the mass incarceration of our community. When I have mothers who walk into my office and tell me that their sons are doing 25 years, 20 years in state prisons, they have no hope of bringing back that child into our community, that grown man back into our community. And so it's a balancing act of how do we keep our community safe, but safe for all of us, including the young men and women like me who grew up in our communities and deserve to feel safe. It's not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary conversation, especially as we look at towards the future of our city.
Marlene, again, we are Latinos in a position to effectuate change. What do you think that we should be doing to ensure that the city and the state moves forward past the pandemic this year?
I'm going to probably give a pragmatic response. First thing that needs to happen is that our people need to get back to work. And Vinny hit on that very hard. And fact of the matter is that people who work are the economic engine of the city of New York. If we don't have jobs, we're not paying taxes. If we don't have taxes, we don't have the finances and the wherewithal to provide additional services and continue to rebuild the city of New York. So certainly we've got to get back to work and get back to work safely. In 2010, when I got here to the Bronx, Overall Economic Development Corporation, our unemployment rate was 14.2%. In the South Bronx, it was like 20.4. It was down to 14.2% because Co-op City, which is a 50,000 unit housing complex, was full of retired seniors. So, you know, that's why the 14.2. But if you think about the 20%, that was a bigger indication of where our community is. The borough of the Bronx is known for the fact that the majority of the residents are predominantly women and women heads of households. So this was a very big deal that our unemployment rate was higher than the 4% that the city of New York was. And so we hit on it. We hit on it hard. And our unemployment rate was down to 4.7 this past February. And now it's back up to 25%. So our people need to go back to work. In those 10 years, we created another 35,000 affordable housing units in the borough of the Bronx. And as a result, the people who moved in, the additional people that came into the 1.45 million that the old census says, are part of the working poor. We are predominantly workers in the service industry. We work in those restaurants that were shuttered. We work in those hotels that were shuttered. We work in the Hunts Point food market, where 8,500 predominantly Bronxites also were either laid off or furloughed. So certainly we need to reopen the city of New York. Even halfway opening it up would be helpful. Our kids need to get back to school, and our infrastructure needs to be rebuilt so that our digital divide is eliminated and change between the haves and the have-nots. I can't begin to stress to you how many of our kids are homeschooling, you know, with their mothers' broken phones. They don't have access to the internet. They definitely don't have their own laptops. So certainly it's not a question of getting back to work, but our education system really and truly needs to meet the needs of our kids, because if we do that, we will be preparing our kids to move forward. The city of New York has the highest gross GDP in the nation. We're the money makers, we're the job makers, we're the ones who moved the machinery, and when we got closed down hard. And so 75% of the food that's grown in California is consumed in the city of New York. So unless we begin to move this economic engine, we are not just adversely impacting the city of New York and the state of New York, but we are breaking the chains between California all the way to the East Coast. Small businesses need access to real capital, especially Latino businesses. It's a proven fact. People have been talking about it recently, that while African-American businesses are having a hard time, we, the Latino businesses, are having even a harder time. And prestamistas are not our friends. We have to ensure that the banks really and truly consider our small businesses as business to invest in, because as a lender, BOEDC does that. The minority businesses that we give money to default at a smaller rate than anybody else. So if we owe money, we pay it. So certainly there is no one solution. What we need is for our leaders to come together. We have a very strong governor, and he has been very good to the Bronx. And we have done well in the Bronx because he has helped us with our businesses. He has helped us with our infrastructure. And certainly the city of New York in the middle of COVID, when they gave out their grants and our loans, although you figure it's 5 boroughs, we should get 20% at the very least of all the money that went through, we got 4% of what the city had to offer. So certainly we need the leadership to come together, to work together for a better, stronger city and a better, stronger community.
Thank you, Marlene. You certainly know that I'm a big fan of the governor as well. Councilman, you know, you began your political career as the youngest member of the New York City Council when you were just in your mid-20s, which for me seems like very many moons ago. Now, more than 6 years later, you're running for Congress. What are the potential challenges of being a millennial member of Congress that you foresee? Because we're all rooting for you come November, right? What policies do you think are going to matter to your generation, both at the federal level and then also at the local level?
I'm learning Washington, D.C., which seems to have its own language and logic. And that logic is not always logical to outsiders like us. It's not an institution designed for millennials, is my impression. The city council, which has term limits, is much more dynamic than Congress, which has no term limits. Congress is more institutionalist, more hierarchical, puts a much greater premium on seniority. When I became a city council member in 2014, I became the chair of the Committee on Public Housing, right? In my first year, I oversaw the largest provider of affordable housing in the country. In Congress, it can take years or decades to accumulate enough seniority to secure a committee chairmanship. So it's a much more challenging place for, the debate around the CBC and CHC reflects the challenges that a millennial faces. But I think what millennials bring is we're much more willing to cause good trouble and question some of the established traditions and norms of Congress. Some go farther than others, but there's a disruptive ethos among millennials. And I think millennials are much more progressive, or tend to be. And think about what it means to be a millennial in America. We've lived through 9/11. We've lived through the catastrophic failures in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've lived through the financial crisis in 2008. We've lived through traumatic events like the killing of George Floyd and Eric Garner, the failure in Katrina, the failure of pandemic preparedness and public health during COVID-19. I think millennials have experienced government failure and institutional failure. And what I sense from people from my generation is a deeply rooted commitment to making government work more effectively for the next generation than it did for ours. So that's my take. We're particularly concerned about the affordability crisis, right? If you're a millennial, you're coping with the crushing cost of housing and higher education and healthcare, which is bankrupting American families and American businesses. There's a crisis of confidence in the American dream. Raj Chetty, who is a researcher from Columbia University, he makes the following observation that in America, you have twice the likelihood of achieving the American dream in Canada than you do in America. That we have much lower rates of social mobility in the United States compared to elsewhere in the industrialized world. In 1970, among those who were 30 years old, you had a more than 90% chance of earning more than your parents did. Today, that number has fallen to 50%, and that's pre-COVID. So I think there's a real desire among millennials to make America work for all of us.
Thank you, Councilman. And that's actually a great segue to the discussion I'd like to start with Vinny, which is, I'm a proud daughter of an 1199er, and the Central Labor Council is an organization that represents such a diverse community, 1.3 million union members. And for many New Yorkers, those union jobs represent stability in wages, it represents healthcare, it represents retirement benefits. So as we think about an equitable recovery from the pandemic, What roles do unions play in sustaining and growing a middle class in New York City? And how can unions become an anchor for the economic recovery of our city and state?
I'll address that, but I'll continue where you started, because I think as we address these three crises of the ongoing crisis of the pandemic, and the public health crisis and the economic crisis, as well as the ongoing struggle for racial justice in this country, as we see as three independent crises but interconnected crises that we're also dealing with, we have to provide hope. And I think upward mobility and what the council member spoke about, the lack of hope for some in the younger generations, I think is something that those of us like myself and like you, Aimee, were able to see because of the benefits of, in my case, my grandfather, my father, both immigrants came here, and they were members of Unite Here, Local 6, my grandfather, till the day he retired. And that helped provide both hope and opportunity and the support that they needed to then eventually put as first generation siblings of mine and myself, all five of us through college and been able to be on sound financial and economic, have a degree of economic security that I don't think is true of a lot of immigrants and certainly Latinos today, that given what's happened with our economy and the economic insecurity and the disparities which exist. So how do we do this in this moment that we're dealing with these in the labor movement? What role do we have? And I think that there's a lot of roles that we have to play, and some of them are more immediate and some of them are longer term. So in the short term, we see industries around New York City enormously impacted. Some of them have been completely shut down, particularly those workers in the face-to-face industries as opposed to the remote work and the essential workers. That's where we're seeing over 70% of the job losses take place, folks who work in retail, folks who work in restaurant industry, and so many other industries. There is a crossover from one industry to the next, but in those industries where people work face to face, which do have a lot of a presence of a lot of lower income and lower income workers, minority workers as well, which have led to enormous economic strain that we've seen. Marlene mentioned earlier some of the unemployment numbers dating back 10 years ago to the Bronx. I mean, today, if we look around the city, we have a 16% unemployment rate. But when you actually factor in all of the self-employed as well, Aimee, we double it. We're up to like 32%. So you have almost 1/3 of workers in the city of New York who are unemployed right now. And in the Bronx, it's even higher, where we have it like just about 41% of workers combined, self-employed, and those workers who are full-time W-2 employees are out of work right now. It's a staggering amount of pressure that are on working people right now in the city. So I think what we need to do is we need to help those industries. We need to help those workers who have been impacted. All workers, by the way, not just workers who have a collective bargaining agreement and the rights of union membership. We have to make sure that we extend the benefits and the help and the support to the industries that have been impacted severely, and the workers individually, not just as industries, the workers who are as individuals who have been impacted and are going to continue to be feel with the consequences of the pandemic and the loss of their income, the loss of their of any means that they've had of providing for themselves and from their family for, in some cases, for the next 6 months or even 12 months in some industries like entertainment sector and hospitality who've been so sorely impacted. And then the second part is we have to work again with our partners that we have here today at the table, but with city and state government to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, recognizing that this is not just any crisis that we're in right now, and that it's going to be all hands on deck from all the different segments and sectors of our economy to bring people together and to grow our economy in a way that is going to be able to provide the opportunity and for folks who've been left behind previously, but also people who have been who have suffered dramatically in this crisis that we're in right now.
Thank you for that, Vinny. I think this is a good discussion in terms of workers, whether they're labor, folks that have been having such a difficult time now during the pandemic. Chancellor, you're back. And the next question is for you. It's something that we at Las Vegas Sands have been thinking about quite a bit as we think about entering the New York market, and that is workforce development. How is CUNY, you talked a little bit about it in the introduction, but if we could get a little bit deeper into it, how is CUNY preparing the city for the next generation of talent across all of the emerging industries, given the new landscape? Are there any workforce development programs or initiatives that any ABNY members may be able to access, or any of the community members that are joining us this afternoon that they may be able to participate in?
Well, thank you for the question. The answer is yes, and we're doing two things, and sort of following on Vincent's comment, all hands on deck. We are both listening, because we need to listen to industry, to labor, to the small business community, to government about what the needs are, and then readapting and retooling to be able to be up with the times. So a couple of examples of that come to mind. One is the governor just signed an assignment of $18 million in workforce grants. I think we got about $8 million of that money to reskill workers in areas of high demands in 4 of our community colleges, right? So we're gonna take that opportunity, and in a community college, right, you can get an associate's degree or an applied associate's, which tend to be the degrees that are less destined for a transfer to a 4-year school. And we need to revamp those applied associate's degree. So there's paths that just take 2 years for good paying jobs for New Yorkers. So we're taking the chance to take a look at the inventory programs that we have, getting rid of the ones that maybe are a little bit outdated and there's no need for, talking to industry to see what they need now and then what that might be needing in the future, and with them thinking about the curriculum design and then creating the opportunities so that the students can do internships and other things, so they have a pipeline into the industry. So, and I have an opportunity that we have of our 7 community colleges, we have 5 new presidents. So I've told them that there's no bigger task than this one for them as they think about their own work and legacy in each of those colleges. We're very fortunate that we are starting with the leadership of Jamie Dimon and others, the CEO, Jobs Council in New York, for good paying jobs. And we're the main educational partner for that. We're already creating micro-credentials in 4 areas based on direct conversations with the industry members there. So I'm just giving examples, and ABNY has such a phenomenal membership and so diverse. And I know that, Melba and I have spoken about making sure that we listen to what you guys need in the field, and then we translate that into academic programs, partnerships. Some might be temporary, some might be long-lasting, right? But this is what CUNY is committed to doing. And again, we have pivoted very quickly to try to do that, and also support our students who are going into the job market, into the most really unfortunate job market in decades. So we've been also very intentional about providing support to the class that graduated last year, that even with the pandemic, we graduated the largest class in CUNY's history, right? So we're doing all that, and we want to do more.
Wonderful, thank you. So we hear a lot, we heard from Vinny and Marlene about the inequities within the community on the economic development and job front, and also on the academic front. This is open to any one of the panelists that would like to answer the question. How do we ensure the health and vitality of the city's at-risk and disadvantaged communities? Namely, how do we bridge the gap in healthcare? Because that, as Tonio alluded to earlier, is a phenomenal issue, right? The gap is either because of language barriers, access to it, just access to insurance. You know, people say, go get a COVID test. Well, if I don't have an insurance and I don't have a job and I can't pay for it, how do I get a COVID test? So how do we bridge that gap in healthcare for New York City's working families? And I open it to any one of you that'd like to go first.
I'd like to chime in there.
Yes,
I think that you hit the nail on the head when you said language barrier and access. I think access is fundamental. When we look at the care we have in New York, we need to make sure that healthcare is not only linguistically, but also culturally competent. One of the things that I've been saying for a few years is that if you look at our systems of healthcare, local systems, local partners, community doctors. We have a wealth and a treasure that I think we have not tapped into yet. For example, I'll give you an example in my community. We have a network of Dominican doctors that during COVID really stood up to the challenge and made sure that testing was happening in our community. They made sure that their clients who were the most vulnerable, their patients, were seen first, were tested first, and they delivered customized care. So I think that this is going to be key in ensuring that our communities stay healthy, because there are underlying conditions that our communities are suffering with every single day, and these doctors are especially trained to do so. One of the things I'd love to see is how we can minimize the barriers that exist for doctors who are here but not practicing as doctors. They were doctors back in our native countries and then come here, and because of lack of access to education or training or just opportunity, have had to pick up second careers here in New York City. We are wasting away that talent if we are not recruiting them into the workforce to deal specifically with healthcare. And of course, I would not be true to my passion if I didn't mention mental health care. We have to make sure that as we talk about health, that mental health care is a priority, because the stigmas around mental health still exist and are alive and well in the Latino community. And this is now coming to a boil with COVID-19. This morning, I was on a call with a principal in my school, and she brought something to my attention that I hadn't really even thought about. The high schoolers, they are reluctant to go on to remote learning because at that age, they care about what they look like. And they are reluctant to even pay attention to what's happening in class, because they are exhibiting symptoms of depression because of what their background looks like or what their hair looks like, or the fact that maybe they've put on a few extra pounds during COVID. These are traumas that have been inflicted on our community, and they are systemic and they are historic. So we have to find ways to also bring access to address those issues.
Absolutely. Do we have time for just one more, if any one of the other panelists want to give their input? Yes, Marlene.
Needless to say, everybody knows that the Bronx is the unhealthiest borough, borough in the state of New York. And so it's something that we've been struggling with. We need more nurses, more doctors who are trained, bilingual, especially trained in the city of New York. Certainly, I totally agree with Carmen de la Rosa that that's something that we need to do. NYU had a program where they provided 2 additional years of training to doctors that were educated in other countries. They did it for dentists, why not do it for doctors? We need the culturally competent nurses and doctors that can service our community. Recruiting nurses from Korea because they are inexpensive is not the way to go. Every minute is crucial when one of our people walks into a hospital. So certainly we need to get that done. The other thing to consider is the fact that many of our communities have food deserts. If we do not have access to fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats, that also impacts our health. The other thing is that asthma is directly related to the impurities in our air. So certainly we should be insisting on green vehicles. We should be insisting on ensuring that our communities are burning the best kind of fuels, and we're not doing that. So it is, again, a holistic approach to our health that is needed, especially within the confines of our community that is impacted the largest by bad practices in our community.
Thank you, Marlene. I'm going to stay with you. We are getting some questions from our audience. And the first question from our audience is for you. And the question is, are there any startup incubators for small businesses and not-for-profits in our communities that can be helpful to folks as they're looking forward past the pandemic?
I'm not sure if they're looking for the incubators or they're looking for financing, probably.
It says incubators for small businesses and or not-for-profit.
All right, there are physically incubators in the Bronx. We have, Sobro has a building on 3rd Avenue. Wedco has incubator kitchens, and so certainly if they reach out to me, and we hope that, and it's mcintron@boedc.org. We also have financing because we knew that the Bronx would be the last borough and to receive assistance from the federal government. We set aside some funds for our small businesses, and we continue to receive funds from banks that are interested in being helpful. So certainly we have financing and we have information. We welcome the opportunity. We're on the internet all the time. We can only finance small businesses in the Bronx. We are the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. If you're a larger company and you're anywhere in New York State, we also have the SBA 504 program that we also supervise. And from there, we can go from $100,000 to $5.5 million. And we can finance businesses anywhere else in the state to that tune. So we have a little bit for everybody. We welcome the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. So this is a general question. Let's see. Why are Latinos relatively underrepresented at the highest levels of government? Assemblyista, we can start with you, or we can start with any one of the other folks.
And add women to that too.
Latinos and women. Look, I think that it's incumbent upon us to hold leadership accountable. When we walk into a room and we don't see a Latino in an issue that impacts our community, we must speak up. We must speak up. I also believe that when it comes to our communities, a lot of the time the people who are doing the work behind the scenes are underappreciated, and we don't take into account what they bring to the table. We have to end that practice within ourselves first in order then to encourage the mobility of more Latinos into the fold. I oftentimes am still the only Latina, only woman, only Dominican in a room when I walk in, but I walk in with the responsibility of knowing that I'm there, but my responsibility is not to be the first nor the last, that I have to hold that door open for more Latina women, for more people from our community to come to the decision-making table. And we have to definitely hold the line for the accountability, right? So if there's an initiative that we are spearheading, make sure you have that person that you're polishing that is coming up behind you to ensure that they can take the baton once we're gone.
Can I just add to that? We own this topic because 51% of the people who vote are women. So su voto es su voz, and we should be demanding more, and we should be supporting more.
I'll just jump in too and say that I think there really has to be a degree of intentionality on the part of leaders of organizations when they get there. They have to make sure that they have that they're empowering staff people that work with them and make sure that they're giving them a path for mobility, certainly as well. But they have to be encouraging diversity in all sort of the culture of the organizations and the leadership of the organizations and the boards, how they, in their meetings, how they really empower folks. And then they have to mentor younger folks as well, and at times get out of the way so some of them can have an escalation and some mobility in their career paths as well.
And can I echo Vincent's words, because I think it's really important, the issue of intentionality. You know, we like Carmen said, you want to, if you're the first, you want to make sure that you're not the last and you keep that door open. But we have to do it also in a way that is consistent with diversity, broadly speaking, because we don't then also want to be, we don't want to do the things that we were accusing others of doing, of keeping people away, right? So for example, in my role at the City University of New York, we have built a team that looks like the students in the city we serve, right? So that's going to mean a lot more opportunities for Latinos because we're so underrepresented. The university provost, which is the most important academic position, is also a Latino in our administration. The first Dominican woman to be president of a college, Stacy Coco Arostos, I appointed her. The interim president at Gutman, Doris Cintron, an educator. So I'm also very proud of having Carmen in a year really change brought a class, well-renowned team of leaders that reflect the Latino diversity, Latina diversity, but also the first Asian American vice chancellor in CUNY's history, the first president of a college that was Asian. So we also need to show that we fight for that inclusion in a very broad and systemic way.
Well, I am certainly comforted by the fact that all of you are leaders within our communities, ensuring that our next generation has the capacity and the ability to have that upward mobility, both within their professional settings, which, as you all know, will also allow them personally to continue to really succeed. With that, I'd like to wrap up this panel discussion for the X Factor on behalf of ABNY, Marlene, Vinny, Assemblywoman de la Rosa, Chancellor Matos Rodriguez, and our Councilman Torres, who had to jump a little while ago. I just want to thank all of you for taking the opportunity this afternoon to be with us and also for providing your insight on these important issues as part of this discussion. With that, I want to welcome back Tonio and our chairman, Stephen Rudenstein, so that they can give our closing remarks this afternoon. Thank you again all for joining us.
Thank you very much, Aimee, and the panel. As I promised with Aimee and Marlene and Vincent and Carmen and Felix and Ritchie, we had a really amazing conversation. We're all New Yorkers. And the work that Stephen has done with Melva and with Laura to put this together, I'm very grateful to the three of you and to the ABNY board and our partners, the young ABNY professionals. And Aimee, the last for best, boy, you knocked it out of the ballpark. Thank you for a great job moderating this panel of superstars. Stephen, to you.
So one last thing, Tonio, thank you for encouraging us to do this and to giving this idea to our panelists. You guys have all been great partners to ABNY for so long. Thank you for all you do. I just want to quote one thing. Assembly Member De La Rosa said she's conscious of leaving the door open for people when she's in a room. It's funny, something my 88-year-old dad said to me the other day, who's getting old. He said, hey, you know, people open the door for your grandfather when he was an immigrant, and people open the door for me. It's your job to open the door also. And that person who opened the door may not be exactly like you. And that's really important. That's part of being New Yorkers. And I think that is really something ABNY wants to do. I encourage everyone to do it in big and small ways. And if you have ways that you feel we can do it, please come to us. We want to be helpful. This is like the lifeblood of the long-term vibrancy of our community. And it is the health and success of our diverse communities that keep us strong. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I wish you all the best. Thank you, everybody.
Bravo.
Thank you again to you and Melva. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.